Welcome to 60 Skills. And the topic of today's lecture is 5 common side effects of meditation. All right, contrary to popular belief, meditation and yogic practice writ large can in fact cause side effects. Now, 5 of the more common side effects involve burning or heating effects in the body, heart palpitations, or a kind of racing in the heart or pressure in the lungs, dizziness and vertigo, a kind of draining effect on the body where you're extremely lethargic, and finally, a detachment from reality. These are the 5 major ones I've seen over the years, and I'll talk a little bit about generally how they manifest. Correcting these things, on the other hand, is a much larger discussion. Generally speaking, ceasing what you're doing tends to help, and things tend to kind of dribble down over time. In many ways, some of these side effects from meditative and yogic practice resemble sports injuries on a more energetic level usually. And so here are some things you should think about. 1, burning and heating effects in the body. Generally speaking, this occurs from practices in which you're pushing a lot of energy into the lower abdomen. Now, in some systems, this is considered an opening or burning open of the channels. In others, the heating effect is simply considered a sign that the practice is working as advertised. Keep in mind, there's a big difference between your abdomen getting a little warm and burning so badly that you're sweating all over and have to sleep with an ice pillow. This has happened to some people. All right, so that's a brief discussion about the heating and burning effects. Next, let's talk about heart palpitations or an overpressure sensation in the lungs. This generally, but not always, comes from practices that tend to center on the solar plexus or heart center. You end up with this odd sensation in the chest of either pressure in the lungs pushing outwards or the heart beating very rapidly. Now, you have to be careful with things like this, and you have to go into a hospital and get properly diagnosed, because things like this can be a number of what we call red flags in the medical community that are indicative of much more serious conditions. That said, a lot of meditative practices that center on this heart region, if improperly employed or excessively employed, can generate these sensations as well. All right. Now, a lot of practices that involve the mental field or the mental body, if taken to an extreme, generally result in headaches first, but can also result in a kind of vertigo. Now, this, again, is something that you have to get biomedically investigated, because vertigo by itself, or an extreme headache for that matter, can be the sign of a much more serious medical condition. However, I have also seen meditative systems that spend a lot of time working on the head, particularly with mental energy, if taken to an extreme, can also cause this phenomenon as well. So you need to keep in mind the easiest way to determine if your meditative practice is causing the problem or not is simply to stop practicing for a little while and see if it gets any better. Notice I said gets better, because it tends to take a very long time, up to months, for these problems to kind of dribble off on their own. Now, certain techniques like the 3 releases, for example, tend to be very helpful with mitigating with some of these things, particularly if caught in the beginning stages. So, all right, we've now talked about issues of headaches or vertigo. Now we can talk about draining effects on vitality writ large. Now, these usually come from a couple of different sources, which I'll get to in a moment. However, working with akasha, or the power of the void, by itself tends to be very draining on most people's vital force. The result of which is, if they work with akasha for any length of time, afterwards they feel tired. If this is done over a very long period of time, it can result in a kind of physical draining, lethargy, and simply ill health. Now, again, as I've mentioned many times before in this lecture, you have to biomedically explore these things if they've been going on for a while or if they're particularly severe. Because what are the more common forms of lethargy that I've seen induced by meditative and yogic practice? First, the sensation of conventional exercise. I can't tell you how many students I've had over the years who start practicing something like Qigong and it makes them feel great. And then 3 or 4 months later, I inevitably get the phone call going, I feel tired all the time. Well, did you quit exercising? Yeah, I did because I felt so good from the practice. Yogic stuff, generally speaking, is not a good substitute for going for a walk, going for a run, doing cardio, and doing your resistance-based exercises. The simple fact of the matter is the body needs exercise and activity to function well, and if you don't get that over time, the functions of the body tend to downregulate. 2, diet. Goofy diets, to be kind, are not uncommon in meditative and yogic circles. That's not to say there isn't a value in fasting periodically, but fasting all the time, for example, is just stupid. You don't need it, and it's generally speaking not good for you, particularly if you're already very emaciated or thin. Likewise, I am not a fan of extreme diets, be that hardcore raw veganism or be that hardcore carnivore. Human beings are omnivores. They're designed to eat a variety of things. Now, if you're having to engage in one of these diets because of a variety of, say, allergic reactions to different foods, that's a different issue. If you're engaging in something like a ketogenic diet because you have medication-resistant childhood seizures, that's another issue entirely. But don't allow your delusion to encourage you to engage in things that over the long term are simply not healthy for you. Also, a lack of sleep. A lot of people with advanced meditative practices also work day jobs. So if you're busy working 10 hours a day, getting in another 4 hours of practice is going to be a little hard. And if you don't get enough sleep over a long enough period of time, guess what? You're going to be tired. So as always, when looking at a meditative or yogic-induced problem, check out the basics in your lifestyle first. The answer might actually be there, and most frequently is. Finally, we'll get to the issue of a disconnection from reality. I have very rarely, but occasionally, met people who've dwelt in non-dual light for so long that they simply can't function in the physical world anymore, or more to the point, they just don't care. Normally, immersion in non-dual light, when correctly done, reinforces your life's purpose. And this, in turn, is very healthy and good for you. If it's used as an escape mechanism, as always, meditation is a bad idea in that light, pun intended. That said, there is one category of non-dual light exposure that I have seen generally result in a disconnection from reality over time. And again, I hesitate to really call this non-dual light, but it's worth mentioning. I have frequently met people who've done high doses of psychedelics over a long period of time who have a hard time functioning in the real world, even if they otherwise appear okay as a result of those experiences. Now, I'm not talking about people who've suffered irreversible brain damage or other type experiences from using psychedelics. I'm talking about people who've simply done them over a long period of time and at the end of the day don't care for the phenomenal world anymore. This is something that I think doesn't really reflect non-dual light, but reflects a long-term result to chemical exposure. So again, it's kind of a subset and really doesn't happen that often, but it does happen, and it's something you need to keep an eye out for. So generally speaking, I've seen side effects from improper meditative or yogic practice come down to heating and burning effects in the body, heart palpitations or a sensation of overpressure in the lungs, headaches and dizziness, a general lethargy or draining of vital force or elan in the body, and finally a disconnection from the phenomenal world or day-to-day life. So, if you enjoyed today's lecture, please hit the subscribe button and give us a like down below. And if you would like to learn more about the 60 Skills curriculum, please check out the links in the details portion down below. Otherwise, train hard and be well.